Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for, I want to thank everyone for their time today. Today we're going to be talking about viewer calculations and more on the advanced side. So, yeah, this is going to be a little bit more advanced than your typical Insight course. So, essentially, here's the agenda of some things we want to talk about today. Mostly concentrating, as you can see, on the calculations. We'll talk about the different types of calculations that are available and different types of functions and all kinds of different things that that are available within the calculation world of viewer. I'll be showing you some examples along the way. Basically, a review of what how to define a calculation, what a calculated measure item is. Well, basically, it's a calculation, just like in Excel or anything else for that matter, any other tool. This creates a way for you to actually, create calculations based on the data within your view. Yeah, and that can be anything from a measure item to a dimension member, an attribute field. So you have these different objects, if you will, that you can create these calculations over. And basically, the different types of users that have the availability to create these calculations are advanced users and above. So basically, more or less, all users can create calculations. The basic language that is used behind the scenes while you're actually defining these calculations is actually called MDX. So this is something that we're actually using to create the calculation. It can be a little cryptic, but if we see if you pay attention today, you'll see that it's logical, and we also have functions that can shield you from some of the complexities of some of the calculations that you generate. Well, how do we do it? So basically, to create a calculated measure item, you would want to insert. You can right-click anywhere on the data grid, for that matter, and insert a calculated measure item. As you can see, if I right-click here on the screen, as you can see, there's an image here where I'm right-clicking on a view. And anywhere on the data grid, it doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, it's going to place that calculation to the right of wherever it is that you clicked on. So, but you can always move it. You can move it pretty much wherever you want, as long as it's a regular calculated item. And so that basically opens up. This actually shows you how you can do it within the View Explorer. So you can either do it within the data grid, or you can create the calculated item while you're in the View Explorer. So it's kind of redundant there, but nevertheless, as you can see, you can do it depending on how what you feel more comfortable with. Same concept here in the View Explorer. You'll right-click on measure items or right-click on any of the other measures, and depending on where you want to place the measure, the calculated measure. You get quite a bit of properties when you create a calculation, and that's kind of important because there's some things that we have to do to clean up the data once the calculation has been defined. And you'll use the property window of the calculation to do some of that. Normally when you create a calculation, the data is not formatted at all. So one of the big things you want to do is create the format, depending on what type of data you're dealing with. So the format, as you can see, it can be a percentage or a dollar sign or just a straight number with some decimal spots. So you'll select what you'll want how you want the data to be formatted. And normally you're always going to want to do this because typically when you define a calculation right away, it'll just show you raw data and many decimal spots. So it definitely is something that you want to do here is clean up the raw data of the calculated column. One other thing that's pretty important here is the actual caption expression. You'll definitely want to change the caption expression because basically otherwise it's going to probably have just a cryptic column name called data 7, and you don't want that. So you'll click on that little button and you'll get another window that allows you to create the calculation, the actual caption expression. And here you can use, free-form text. You can also bring in some of the time parameters that are being used on some of the primary the primary numbers that you're using within your calculation. and you can keep that dynamic. So it actually shows you, you know, what the time frame is for that calculation based on any of the measures that you use within your calculation. So it's gotten a little more advanced in terms of how you can caption the header of the actual measure, the calculated measure. The expression itself, if you ever want to get back into the calculation, you can click on that button and it'll take you right into the expression builder. There's some other things we'll talk about. They're actually talked about on some other courses and whatnot, but definitely some other things you can do with your calculation. You can place a conditional format on it, depending on, you know, if you want to maybe show up some negatives in red. You can do a pop-up expression based on the conditional format, so you can tell the users what the format means. You know, all kinds of different things. I can filter on it, sort. Do I want to show a total? So you've got some options here, some additional, you know, miscellaneous options that you can kind of screw around with. At a global level, there's two different types of calculated measures. And normally, this came into play a lot more important when time was a dimension. Now, typically, by default, when you create a view, time is treated as a range. And so it's handled basically column by column. So the whole concept of a distinct calculated measure with a view using time as a range is pretty much irrelevant. The only time typically you'd want to use a distinct calculated measure is when you're using time as a dimension. This is where it comes into play here, because basically a distinct calculation will only be performed once, and it won't be repeated for each year, for each member of time. So this is kind of how you can control the distinct calculated measure so that it basically doesn't do a bunch of calculations across your years. Maybe you just want to see just one actual selling price for the current year. You don't care to see it for prior years. So I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about, but that's basically what the distinct calculated measure is used for. So if you're not using a view with time as a dimension, it's pretty much irrelevant. You don't really need to use it. And like I said, I'll show you, matter of fact, we have some screenshots here that will actually show you what we're talking about. A regular measure item. So here, basically, so we're using a time dimension view. As we can see, the time is treated as a dimension. So we have multiple years within my view, my view. And so the regular calculation is going to be performed automatically for both of my members of time, 2008 and 2007. Well, maybe I didn't want to do that. Maybe I just want to present the total for one of my years. That's where you'll use a distinct calculation. Here's where we can say, okay, basically use a distinct calculation, and then it'll only be calculated once for the given year that you choose. The distinct calculation has some restrictions when you use them. As you can see, I can only place them before or after my regular measures. So in this case, it comes after my regular measures and their grand total. So not the most ideal thing. I could put it before here, and then I could sort my years and months so that perhaps the same year is next to the percent of total. So not all is lost. I mean, certainly you can finagle this to look good. But that's really the key difference between a distinct calculated measure item and a regular calculated measure item. So basically, when you create a calculation, normally what you'll see is, when you get into it, is the actual calculation expression window. This is where you're going to build your calculation. And so on the right-hand side of the window, you can see a free-form area. You can place your cursor in there, and you can create your calculation. To the left are some folders: dimensions, data items, and functions. And these folders will basically expose the different objects within the view that you're working in. So in this case, we can see that there's a folder called dimensions, a folder called data items, and a folder called functions. The dimensions will present the different levels, the members, and the attributes that you can use within your calculation. The data items, or it might say measure items, depending on what version you're using, that'll dictate and it'll group together all the different regular measures within your view that you can build your calculations over as well. And then the functions folder is going to expose the different types of functions that you can pursue within your calculations. So we could talk about the different types of functions that are available, and I'll show you a few that'll come in handy. Okay, so basically calculation examples. Let's talk about some different examples using mathematical expressions, some different types of functions, and more. So starting pretty simple, we can see that when I create a calculation here, I'm using, in this example, a time range view, so we can see the time is actually incorporated within the range. So basically, you've got the different average selling prices that are available. And here I can create an average selling price simply by taking dollars over units. And so that's pretty simple, you know, basic math where you can take a dollar amount over a unit amount. Here we can see that we can control that average selling price by using an if statement. So now we're incorporating an if statement to say if my units are equal to 0, that is my divisor is 0, then go ahead and make the calculation cell, that particular cell, a null, so nothing gets returned. Otherwise, you go ahead and do the same math that we just did. So in this case, we're doing some logic. Basically, the first part of the if statement is to specify whether something is equal to 0, and that is my divisor. Then, if that is true, then go ahead and present the null, or nothing. Else, go ahead and do the calculation, because otherwise there's data there, and the calculation will be valid. So this is one way to get rid of your divide by 0 errors that you might experience. So we can see here that you've got sales breaking down the different syntax items. You can see the logic being broken down for you. Pretty simple. However, there is a divide with 0 check. So if we look further into the functions, we can see that I can, in my Stratum Viewer folder, I have some functions that are available that might make my life easier. And one of those things is called divide with 0 check. So basically that logic's already built into the divide with 0 check so that you don't have to create these if statements along the way. So basically it makes the job easier and requires you to use less syntax to basically accomplish the same thing. So basically, and so other formats and other functions that are available, here we can see an absolute value function that returns the absolute value of the measure, whether it's negative or positive. So that's one other function that's available within your function folder. And that can control, obviously, if you just want to control your negatives and turn them into positives, this would be a great way to do that. You can also incorporate the absolute function into returns as percentage signs as well. So, you know, obviously you can just present those as absolute value. Here we can see that the absolute value, this is the breakdown of that return calculation, just using the absolute value for all my different return amount calculation measures within the calculation. So the different Stratum Viewer functions that are available, again, you want to take advantage of some of those. Normally you'll see that divide with 0 check, percent of change, percent of total. Those are the more commonly used ones that are available. Here we can see a percent of change. So if I were able to just click on percent of change, then I would need to select the two different measures that I want to see the percent of change on. So all I have to do is click on percent of change and then select the different measures within my measure items folder. Pretty simple to build my percent of change calculation. You can also build calculations over other things other than just your regular measures. In this case, we're going to talk about using a calculation to build a calculation over an attribute. And if you don't know what an attribute is, it's basically a different field that are available. Different fields that are available for each one of your dimensions. So a description, typically you won't build a calculation over that. but you might have different types of numerical fields that are available for your items, such as like standard cost or maybe a list price or even an expiration date. How can we leverage these different fields into our calculations? Well, here, and just kind of looking at and breaking this down a little bit, we can see that here we can use the val function to turn that string into a number. And so in doing so, I can use the val function to turn my attribute fields into a number at that point, in which then I can incorporate into my mathematical calculations. So to extend out my standard cost or my list price, I can take the list price and the cost fields, turn them into a number by using my val function, and then just taking that and multiplying that against my sales units field to then extend the list price or the cost of that particular item. And I can do the same thing down here for my credit limit, turn that into a number. I can also use a date difference calculation or function to do different numbers of how many days do I have between now or today and my first sales order. So there's all kinds of fun things you can do with dates if you have date fields within your Stratum solution. How long has this item been in stock? How long is this, how many days do I have before I need to place an order? All kinds of different things that you can play with and calculate using days. Okay. Here's an example where I've got an error that's appearing because I have I'm actually using a calculation against one of those attribute fields, but I'm not at the product level. So this is probably what's going to happen when you have a situation where you're calculating against something but you haven't drilled to that level yet. So you might see something along these lines. You can actually correct this by building into your calculation a check to see if you're at the product level first, and then if you are, then to go ahead and do that calculation. That calculation is down here below where I can see I'm using the if statement to then check to see if my current level name is product. And if so, then go ahead and do that calculation. If I'm not at product level, then it's going to present a null. So here I can see I'm at the division level, and sure enough, a null is presented so that I don't see anything funky or I don't have any error signs there any longer. But when I drill to the item level, it'll then present my calculation. Here's a good calculation for a days to expiration. As I discussed just previously here, we can use the date diff function to basically do a calculation of how many days I have between now and the last used date or the last sold date. There's all kinds of things. If you're capturing some of these dates, you can do these types of calculations. As you can see, our demo data is really old, so those numbers are quite large. So basically a date diff, you can do a day or a month. So as you can see, this would dictate the unit of time. Now, open and close paren is basically just today and this moment in time of right now. So it's basically a timestamp of now. And then there's my pickup field, my attribute field for last use date. So you can just follow the syntax to basically accomplish some of the same things. If you're using time as a hierarchy or as a dimension, you can also now incorporate time into your calculation, of course. You can define a slice of data, and you can now use time to basically present time into the calculation and really just show segments of time within your Stratum solution. Such as this. Here we can see that we've got a couple of measures here built over time where I can then just show current month sales and current week sales. Current week sales is highlighted because there's the actual syntax below where we can see that we're actually grabbing the current week number and we're marrying that up to the sales amount measure. And this is what we call a tuple. That's a technical term for basically taking a section of the cube and intersecting that with another section of the cube. In this case, we're saying, just show me current week sales amount. And this is dynamic. This will always be current week. As you can see, the actual calculation is built over current year and current week instead of the actual absolute year and absolute week. So in essence, this keeps it dynamic and keeps it always current. And you can do the same thing with your month, of course, or by year, or however you want to slice time into your calculation. You can also do that with regular dimensions as well, not necessarily time dimensions. Below you can see here an example where I'm actually slicing out a specific product family member, and I'm then marrying that up to my sales amount to then show product family 5 or product family 50 sales. And what's cool about that is, I'm aggregating that data at rep broker level. So you don't have to be at the level to show that data. If you're calculating against an attribute, yes, of course, you have to be at that level. But just because I'm calculating against a member, that can be aggregated. So now I can actually see this data at other levels. And that's what kind of makes it so powerful. Here I can do it on multiple members. I've just showed you how to do it for a single member. How do I do it for multiple members? You can use the sum function and then sum up these multiple members. Notice the syntax here where I'm actually including product family 50 and 51. And then that way I can then marry that up again to my sales amount. So now I can actually have a column here for 50 and 51. Where you can see it here as presented as such here. Okay, so the sum function is critical here. Another thing that's pretty critical are the what they call French brackets around my set of product families, which are only 2 at this point. So as you can see, I can incorporate more into this set and show multiple product families if I wanted to. Here's something that comes up at year end. From time to time, we get a call where you have some customers out there that use the product and they have a bunch of measures that are set up for January to previous fiscal month because they only want to show closed months for their year-to-date number, which is completely reasonable. The problem is, come January, the previous month is not a valid time selection. So many of our customers will call and be like, why am I getting these errors? My views aren't working, blah, blah, blah. And that is true. That will happen. So basically, what we can help you with there is to have you check what month you're in first, and then go ahead and perform the calculation based on the different time frames that you want to deal with here. For instance, if you want in January, what would you like to show in January? Well, if you're already showing, you're showing your closed months, the only really logical thing to show for January is last year's sales for a year-to-date column. You don't have a year-to-date in January because nothing's closed. So come January, and that's exactly how this calculation is written. If I'm in January, that is if I'm in month of now equal to 1, so now I'm using a month function to basically dictate what unit of time I am using for my now function. And if that equals 1, i.e. if that is January, then I want to show last year's sales, and that's exactly what I'm doing right here. Comma, that means I'm in another month other than January. Comma, then go ahead and use show this year's year-to-date number. Okay? See how that works? I mean, it's quite simple, actually, but it's genius at the same time. So now that's going to get you away from showing or from getting these errors when you're using these time frames that could potentially be invalid on the first month of your calendar year. So this is definitely something you want to take a look at when you're building your different time ranges, and something you want to definitely think about. Another really cool thing you can do with these calculations is to show a count. And this is kind of cool because I can actually see the different numbers of products perhaps, or the number of the customers I have by region. Here in this example, I'm showing the number of products by customer and how many different unique products that they've purchased from me. So here I've got the count function. I'm doing a cross join of my products and my sales units, and then I'm excluding anything that doesn't have any data between those two for those two items. That's what the exclude empty syntax is all about. And that gives you your count right above, as you can see above there. And you can add aggregate levels. In this case, customer sold to, I could see how many products that are being sold to that customer. So this works really well with dashboarding. You know, if you want to see different key points of data without presenting, you know, lots of detail, this is really something that's key that can help you do something along those lines. Here's another quite common request that we get is a percent of subtotal. We can do a percent of total pretty quickly, but how do you do a percent of subtotal? So basically, you know, there's some things that you need to go through in order to create that, in order to get the actual percent of total to actually calculate over your subtotal instead of your total. Okay. So there's some, first of all, some setup that you have to do in order to create this, and one of those things is to actually create a subtotal, a calculation that's going to give you your subtotal amount for each one of your groupings, in this case, customer type. That way, then you can take your regular measure and just do an achievement percent over that. That's all this is doing. So how do we calculate the subtotal amount? What's broken down here, as you can see, all the subtotal amount is a max function. So now we're saying, okay, give me the max of each customer and their the sales amount, which is basically their subtotal amount. And that's basically how you would create that particular calculated measure. So this is a calculated measure using another calculated measure, as you can see. And certainly that's allowed. And this is how basically this is how you can create that percent of subtotal. Right? So not too difficult as long as you break it down and follow the steps logically here. You can do it too. All right. Ranking, another cool thing that I can do is rank different things. In this case, I'm ranking my customer so that I can see who's on top and very quickly. Another good example of how to use some of these calculations for dashboarding and for high impact. Here we can see the rank function against my sold to, and I'm marrying that up with my sales amount so it knows how to rank it. Okay, so you definitely want to follow the syntax as such. The last part of that syntax is telling it how to sort it. In this case, it's in descending fashion. Okay, and so it sorts that automatically for you. Okay, so that's a great one, and that's certainly something that you can pursue. Here's a pretty powerful one where you can actually finagle some data. In this case, you might have attribute data within your solution that is not the most elegantly formatted. Well, certainly you can take control of that. Here's a great example of how I can format some data here within, and it looks like calendar data. So it's a date, my first order date for that customer. Well, how can I present that in a little bit better of a fashion so that it's a little easier on the eyes for the users? Actually, it looks like a date. And as you can see, I'm using the right, mid, and the left functions to finagle to get the different components of my date and to present them in a specific order. And I'm just doing an append, as you can see, using my plus, my double quote, / double quote, and another plus is basically slicing in and appending in that / to make it look like my calculation right down here below. Okay. And so certainly those calculations are quite powerful as well. You know, being able to kind of grab a portion of the string and control how you want it to be displayed. Okay. So I'd like to show a couple of these live in action, and we also have a few questions I'd like to get to as well. We can see that, you know, I've got all kinds of different examples here of how these are accomplished. Let me get some of these questions and see if we can do some things that you guys want to see. Okay, let's see. Let's see. There's a question about time. If I have time, if we could talk about empty filter and how to see lost sales for a given time period. Sure. So basically, one way to do that, I guess, I'll just build something up from scratch. Okay, so just building a view here, just right off the cuff here. Just going to throw in some customers. Okay, and I'd like to know what customers, based on sales, which customers are buying from me and which ones are not. So let's grab some sales data. I'll just use returns. You can certainly use dollars if you want. And I'll do giant year-to-date. And I'll just click cancel instead. Gosh darn it. All right, just getting all that back. All right, so where are we at here? Sales units, year-to-date. And voila, we have data. Okay, so basically I'd like to show, talking about these filters, one thing is they're controlled at the different folder level. So if I go to my rows and I check my properties on my rows, it's already shown down here, but you can get your properties menu. If it's not already shown, you can right-click on rows and go to properties, and you'll see. And there's a couple of filter options down here. You'll see a relationship filter and an empty filter, and they're both turned on. What do they mean? Well, basically it means that it's only showing me data where there's data and where there's where data exists for these customer sold tools. If you want to see where it doesn't exist, you can turn these off accordingly. So if I turn off my relationship filter, first of all, it tells you, well, first of all, you have to turn off your empty filter. And so in doing so, I can then turn off my relationship filter. Now be careful here. If you do this at a highly populated level, what this is going to do is it's going to bring back all the members. So think about it. If I have a bunch of old master file data that's still in my solution, it's basically going to bring back all my customers' old tools. Let's see what it does here. So for me, it's not such a huge impact because I live in a vacuum. I have a demo database. For you guys, it could be the difference between 10,000 rows and 1 million. So how do we control that? Well, if you can stick a user list in there. If you want to just control it with active customers, you can always filter down your list of how you want the filter to behave. Okay, so if I apply a user list, if I filter my sold tos on a user list, perhaps you can always select which ones you want to manually select them, or I can change the filter type to use a user list of certain customers that I would want to use. That way you're putting a fence around the user list here. Okay. You're not going to bring back everything. And I didn't come up with any, it's still just showing items that have data. So again, I'm demo data versus your real world. So you're going to come up with, here it would show you any other, within your list, any other customers that did not purchase within this time frame. Okay, and so I would imagine you definitely would have some hits there. And that's how you would do that. So again, I guess the moral of this story is use a user list so that you don't have any runaway queries, because this thing can get away from you pretty quickly. I'm going to unmute you guys. Hold on.
Unmuted.
All right, Cindy, is that okay? Does that work for you?
Yeah, that was perfect.
Okay. And you understand the concept of using a user list, so you don't have a bunch of.
I do, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So as long as you remember that, you're golden.
Okay.
And you can at that point, and if you can make an alert if you wanted to, you can then come up here and say, well, I really only want to see the 0 item. So you could just build a filter here and just be like, you'll just make it equal to 0. And so that way, you'll just show you the 0 numbers, the accounts. I obviously don't care to see the guys that have sales. I just want to see no sales. So here it's showing nothing because, again, my database sucks. But you'll have some hits there, and then it will only show you the emptiness that you'll see there. And if you turn this into an action, and you only send it when there's rows, you'll only get an email when you get some hits here. So I guess it all depends on the exploratory analysis. Would you want this to be an alert or just explore? Either way, that's the way you can handle that.
Okay, thank you.
And then you had another question. So show percentage change where 1 year is 0 and the next year has sales. Should be 100%. I agree. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I've got an example I could probably use right out of the box. Okay, so let's see. Let's see what I have here. I don't know if I have 0 sales. That's the problem. I'll make it 0. However, I'll just make them all 0. How's that? Let's go. Come on. All right. So there you have it. So now I'm going to build in a percentage here. I'm going to insert a calculated measure, and I'm going to open up my measure items. And so basically we want to show one way to do this, I guess. The old school way I would do initially attempt this would be think about this. If this guy is greater than 0 and this guy is equal to 0, then 1, else. I mean, you can really, well, you don't want to say else there. And then you can, at that point, just do the regular, the regular math, however you want to do, depending on what type of percentage you're looking for. Normally, I do like a variance percentage. So I would just do this difference first all over that guy. Let's see what we get here. You should get a bunch of 1s. So here's what I was talking about formatting. As you can see, right off the bat, initially you're going to get raw data. You're going to get a cryptic column header. So if we right-click this, go to Properties, I'm going to change my caption to $%, And then my format string, I'm changing to a percent sign. So everything's 100%. How's that?
Good. Could you show that expression again, just so I can make a print screen of it? Okay.
Yeah, it's right there. So basically, if my divisor is greater than, no, if my numerator is greater than 0 and my divisor equals 0, make it a 1. Else do math, or else you're still going to get a divide by 0 there. Then you can do an else divide by 0 check. You know, you can do this better even. Like I could do this. Yeah, and that's even better. Because then you're actually you're accommodating the divide by 0, and the last part of your global if statement here. Now, I've validated that. It seems to check out okay. It's going to give me the same result. It's not going to change. So that's the one you want right there.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. To learn MDX, well, I think probably the best resources are our help menus. So basically, you want to check out our help menus and read up on some of these calculations. Other than that, I don't. It's kind of difficult because in order to find some of the calculation stuff here, we can see that let's see. You're going to want to look at under all the calculation related stuff here. So let me see. Measure items would be definitely something there. And then quick start, insert, calculated. So this will get you started, what we just talked about. And then to get something a little more advanced, just go into additional information, advanced concepts. This is where you're going to see some more stuff here that's going to be more MDX related. You can go into different examples. Let's see. Trying to figure out what would be the best area to go to here. Yeah, so here's what I was looking for under the examples. So under additional information, examples, under the measure items, you're going to see some syntax that you could actually copy and paste, and then if you finagle it such that it marries up to what you have, you can pursue a lot of these different types of functions. So this kind of goes through some of the functions and how they relate to using them in Viewer. So there is quite a bit of information here. Here's my current level check. Here's the count function, quite a bit of information on that. So definitely, you got quite a bit of information just right here within the help menu. So definitely want to digest all of that, and then really, in all honesty, I would start there and just and try to digest what we have here, because this is really probably going to be the most relevant piece for you to relate to Viewer. Because if you Google MDX, you're going to get a bunch of development stuff. You're going to get it's going to get you in too deep. I'm afraid. So I would just start here and then follow up. You know, if you have any further questions, we're always available. So you can always contact us, and if there's something specifically that you're looking to do or whatever, just shoot me over an email. I'll be glad to push you in the right direction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions from anybody? Anyone? The mic's open. Any further questions? All right, well, if there's no further questions, I thought this was a pretty good session. We covered quite a bit of information here. It was quite, a little cryptic, I understand, but stick with it. It gets easier. It gets better. It'll make more sense the more you work with it, just like anything else. And once again, thanks everyone. I appreciate your time. We'll see you in a couple more weeks on the next session. We're going to be putting a new schedule out there, and so you definitely want to check that out. And it'll take us to the end of the year. And also remember, we're coming up on year end, so we'll be covering some things to go through to make sure that you're ready for the new year. So you don't want to miss that.